Welcome to Folk Stories, where the lessons are darker than the folklore, and what you think is safe often hides a nightmare. In the quiet city of Kiboko, the night felt special but heavy. Elara and Sephu held their son Kwame's hands tightly as they stood at the gates of Bright Path boarding school. They smiled, even laughed a little, pretending to be proud and strong. But deep inside, Elara's heart was full of worry. She didn't want to let go. Kwame, just 12, looked back at them with unsure eyes, but he didn't say anything. They hugged him goodbye and watched him walk away, not knowing that this would be the last moment of peace for a long time. That night, their small home felt too quiet. Elara sat near the window, her phone in her hand, her heart restless. Around midnight, the phone rang. It was a number she didn't know. Her hands shook as she answered. A voice said coldly, "Your son is unresponsive, bleeding." Elara froze. She couldn't speak. The phone almost fell from her hand. Sephu grabbed it, shouting, "What happened? Where is he?" They rushed to the school in the dark, fear eating them alive. No one had answers. No one looked them in the eye. Elara saw her son lying still, his small body pale, his shirt stained with blood. She called his name over and over, but he didn't open his eyes. Her proud smile from earlier was gone, replaced by tears, panic, and pain no mother should ever feel. The night they thought would be a beginning turned into their worst nightmare. Kwame lay quietly on a narrow bed in the school infirmary. The room was cold, dusty, and smelled like old medicine. The sheets were stained, and the walls had cracks. It didn't feel like a place meant to heal children. His tiny hands were shaking, his lips dry, and his body weak. Elara sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, her eyes full of tears. Sephu stood in the corner, silent, his face frozen with fear and anger. They had brought their son to this school for a better future, but now, they didn't even know if he would survive the night. Kwame tried to speak, but his voice was weak, just a whisper. Elara leaned in close, desperate to hear. He said only one thing before drifting back into unconsciousness: "The seniors, they made us take pills." Elara's heart stopped. "What pills?" she asked softly, but he had already closed his eyes again. Sephu clenched his fists. A storm was growing inside him. The nurse, an older woman with tired eyes, stood near the door watching them. Her uniform was wrinkled, her shoes old. She didn't say much, but just before she walked away, she whispered something that stayed in Elara's mind forever. "You'll never walk alone here." Her voice was low, almost afraid. It was as if she wanted to help, but couldn't do so openly. Then she disappeared down the hallway, leaving them in silence once again. Elara looked around the infirmary. There were no other children there, no doctors, no real care. Just an empty room and the sound of their son's slow breathing. What kind of school was this? Who gives children pills and leaves them bleeding? She wanted answers, but everyone at the school avoided eye contact. They acted like nothing had happened. Some staff even smiled politely, as if Elara and Sephu were just overreacting parents. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. Her mind kept going back to Kwame's words. Unknown pills. Forced by seniors. How long had this been going on? Were there other children like him, suffering in silence, too afraid to speak? She thought about the nurse's whisper, maybe it was a warning, maybe a cry for help. Sephu tried to stay strong, but even he couldn't hide the pain in his eyes. "This isn't just one mistake," he said. "This is a secret they're hiding." Elara nodded. She knew something was very wrong at Bright Path boarding school. And she also knew that whatever was buried here, they would have to dig it up themselves, no matter how painful it would be. They stayed by Kwame's side through the night, watching him breathe, praying he would wake up again and tell them more. But deep in their hearts, they already knew the truth: their son had been hurt, not just by students, but by a system that allowed it to happen, and then kept it quiet. The secret wasn't just in the pills. It was in the silence. In the fear. In the way everyone looked away. Elara knew that if they didn't speak up, more children would suffer. But first, they had to bring their son back from the edge. And then, they would fight. News spread fast across Kiboko. Within days, parents were talking, whispering, gathering in small groups near shops, at churches, and at the school gate. Everyone had heard about what happened to Kwame. Some were shocked. Others were scared. Many were angry. They started asking questions, about safety, about the school's responsibility, about their own children. Was Kwame the only one? Or were there others being hurt too? Soon, families began to gather outside Bright Path boarding school. Mothers held up signs. Fathers shouted for justice. They demanded answers from the school. They wanted the truth. Why was a child bleeding and unconscious? Why were pills involved? The school gate stayed closed, and inside, the leaders quickly made a plan, not to tell the truth, but to protect their name. The principal came out in front of cameras and reporters, wearing a suit and a fake smile. He didn't mention the pills. He didn't mention the seniors. Instead, he blamed Kwame. He looked straight into the camera and said, sadly, the boy's body was weak. His immune system couldn't handle school life. People watched in shock. Some believed him. Others didn't know what to think. But Elara and Sephew? They felt like their hearts were being stabbed again. Blaming their son. Turning the whole story upside down. Elara wanted to scream. Sephew wanted to fight. But they couldn't. They were just two parents with no money, no lawyers, and no power. Taking the school to court would cost more than they could ever afford. They were already drowning in hospital bills, struggling just to pay for medicine and food. So, they stayed silent. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. They started to feel alone. Some neighbors who had once smiled at them now crossed the road to avoid them. A few even whispered that Kwame was sick before joining the school. Elara heard one woman say, maybe he was too soft for boarding life. These words crushed her. She wanted to shout, my son is not weak. He was poisoned. But instead, she kept walking. At night, their house felt colder. The silence grew louder. Kwame was still recovering, sleeping most of the day, barely speaking. He didn't smile anymore. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask about school or friends. Elara would sit next to him, brushing his hair gently, whispering, you're safe now. But she didn't even believe her own words. Sephew began to avoid people altogether. He stopped going to the market. He stopped answering calls. He just sat by the window, staring outside, blaming himself for not protecting his son. Elara often cried alone in the bathroom, where no one could hear her. Their home, once full of love and dreams, now felt like a prison of quiet pain. They didn't know what to do. They only had one hope left, that Kwame would heal, that one day, he would open up and tell them more. Until then, they kept surviving, one day at a time, carrying the weight of truth in a world that didn't want to listen. After many long and painful weeks, Kwame finally opened his eyes. Elara was there, holding his hand, her eyes swollen from crying. Sephew stood close, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid that any sound might make their son slip away again. But Kwame didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't ask where he was. He just stared at the ceiling, like he was trapped in a place far away from them. His face looked the same, but something deep in him had changed. His arms had marks, small bruises in strange places. His skin was pale. His body, once full of energy, looked tired and thin. Elara gently asked him, do you remember what happened? But Kwame turned his head to the wall and said nothing. Sephew knelt beside him and whispered, we're here, son. You're safe now. Still, nothing. Day after day, Kwame stayed silent. He didn't mention the pills. He didn't talk about the seniors. He just lay there, breathing, but not truly living. The hospital bills kept growing, and Alara knew they couldn't leave him there much longer. She made a hard choice. She sold their furniture, her wedding jewelry, even her small sewing machine. One by one, the things they built their life with were gone. But it didn't matter. All that mattered was bringing Kwame home. They carried him into the house wrapped in a blanket. No music, no celebration. Just quiet footsteps and tired hearts. At home, things weren't the same. Kwame didn't want to eat with them. He didn't talk or play. At night, he slept beside Alara, but he didn't look at her. He didn't hold her hand or call her mama like before. It felt like he was there, but not really there. Like a ghost of the child they once knew. Alara tried to smile for him. She told him stories. She played his favorite songs. But nothing brought him back. Sephew walked around the house with heavy steps. He tried to fix things, repair old cracks, sweep the floor, anything to stay busy. But even his strong hands couldn't fix the broken silence in their home. Sometimes Alara would wake up in the night and see Kwame staring at the wall, his eyes wide open. She wanted to ask what he was thinking. But she was afraid of the answer. The house was full of silence. A deep, heavy silence that no music or prayer could lift. It was louder than screams. More painful than any wound. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors avoided their door. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. And Alara and Sephew stayed inside, living each day in quiet sadness. Still, Alara refused to give up. Every morning, she looked at her son and whispered, "You will be okay. One day, you will come back to us." She didn't know when or how, but she believed it with all her heart. Because even in the darkest silence, a mother's hope never dies. And somewhere deep inside Kwame, a light was still there, small and flickering, but not gone. Alara had waited long enough. Each day she watched Kwame, quiet and distant, and her heart broke all over again. He wouldn't speak of what happened, but the fear in his eyes was louder than words. Alara knew the truth was still hidden somewhere, buried behind school walls. She had no money, no lawyers, but she had something stronger, determination. One evening, she put on her old coat and left the house quietly. She went to find the only person who might know more, Mama Nia, the old janitor who used to work at Bright Path boarding school before being fired without reason. Mama Nia lived in a small house at the edge of town. When Alara arrived, the old woman opened the door slowly, surprised but not unkind. They sat in silence for a moment before Alara said softly, "It's about my son. Kwame." At the sound of his name, Mama Nia's face changed. She sighed deeply and nodded. "Come inside," she said. "There's something you need to see." She led Alara to a back room, dusty and dark. Hidden behind an old cupboard, there was a wooden box. She opened it and showed Alara small bottles, covered in dust. The labels were clear and chilling, test only, not for students. Alara picked one up, her hands shaking. "What are these?" she whispered. Mama Nia looked down. "I don't know exactly. But I saw students forced to take them. They were told it was vitamins. But then, they changed." She then handed Alara a stack of old papers, documents she had secretly copied before leaving the school. Alara sat on the floor and read them slowly. Her heart sank with each page. These weren't just random mistakes. There were lists of students, notes about their reactions after taking pills, and even signatures from staff members. Someone had been watching, recording, and experimenting. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Alara felt the room spinning. Her son had been used. Not protected. Not educated. Used. She thought back to all the parents who trusted that school, the smiling principal, the clean uniforms, the promises. It had all been a lie. Her son was nearly killed by something no one was supposed to know about. And yet here it was, in her hands. Mama Nia placed a hand on Elara's shoulder. They hoped no one would look. No one ever has. Until now. Elara stood up, her fingers gripping the papers tightly. Her heart was breaking, but her eyes were filled with something new, fire. They hurt the wrong child, she said quietly. And they chose the wrong mother to silence. Her world had cracked wide open, but now, she wasn't afraid. The silence was over. She would speak. She would fight. And no matter what it cost her, she would make sure the truth was no longer hidden. Elara had stayed quiet for too long. She had watched her son suffer in silence, locked in his own pain, and she had cried behind closed doors. But now, with the hidden documents in her hands and the truth too heavy to carry alone, she knew she had to speak. She reached out to a young local journalist named Amina, someone known for telling stories no one else dared to. When they met, Elara didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just opened her bag and placed the papers, the pill bottles, and a photo of Kwame in front of her. Amina listened in shock, taking careful notes. "Do you want to go public with this?" she asked. Elara nodded slowly. "People need to know. Not just for my son, but for every child who's still there." A few days later, they returned with a camera crew. Kwame sat quietly on the couch. He still didn't speak much, but when Amina gently asked, "Can we show your scars?" he slowly lifted his shirt. Faint, dark lines stretched across his ribs. Evidence of the nightmare he'd survived. The video was uploaded that same night. By morning, Kiboko was buzzing. Thousands had watched the clip. Then tens of thousands. The story was shared across the country. People were shocked, angry, heartbroken. Parents who had children in boarding schools called their kids, demanding to know if they were safe. Others shared their own stories, silent cries they had buried for years. The Ministry of Education couldn't ignore the storm. Within days, officials arrived at Bright Path Boarding School. They questioned staff, looked through records, and uncovered more than anyone had expected. Hidden pills, destroyed files, and secret punishment rooms. The school was ordered to shut down immediately. News cameras showed students leaving with suitcases, their faces confused and tired. But the most powerful moment came when former students, now grown, began to speak. One by one, they came forward online and on TV. "We were trained to keep quiet," said one man. "If you spoke, you were punished. If you cried, you were weak." A woman added, "We were told we were chosen for something great. But now I see, we were only tools." The country watched in horror. What had once been a respected school was now seen for what it truly was, a place of hidden pain. Elara's story became the center of the conversation. Mothers reached out to her. Fathers wept and apologized for not seeing the truth sooner. The silence had finally broken, and the noise could no longer be ignored. Through it all, Kwame stayed by Elara's side. He didn't say much, but he held her hand in public now. When reporters asked if he was okay, he would nod. He was still healing, still hurting, but for the first time, he wasn't alone. Elara looked at him with quiet strength, knowing the battle wasn't over, but the truth was no longer in the dark. Her voice had started a wave, and now, it was unstoppable. The world had finally listened. A year had passed, but the memory still lived fresh in the hearts of many. In Kiboko Hall, parents gathered for a mental health seminar. The room was full, some curious, some worried, others simply silent. Many had seen the video of Kwame. Many had followed the news when Bright Path Boarding School was shut down. But now, they were here to listen, to understand, and maybe to change. Elara sat quietly near the front, her hands holding a folded paper. Kwame was beside her, taller now, still quiet, but stronger. When the host called her name, she stood up slowly and walked to the microphone. The room fell still. Elara didn't shout. She didn't cry. Her voice was calm, steady, but each word cut through the silence. Boarding school might give them grades, she said, looking around the room. But it can hide their screams. Never send your child where their fears are locked behind closed doors. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a soft sob came from the back. A mother held her head in her hands. Another clutched her child closer. Fathers looked down at their phones, unsure where to place their guilt. Elara didn't blame them. She had once believed the same lies. But now she knew better. Kwame stepped beside her. He didn't say a word, but his presence said enough. He was alive. Scarred, yes, but standing. And in that moment, a room full of parents didn't just hear a speech. They heard a warning, and they listened. If you thought boarding school was safe, think again. Stories like this show the darkness lurking in places we trust. Until next time, only here on Folk Stories.